What's a messed up fact you just can't believe is true? Story 1. In the 1980s, the Bayer Corporation sold a hemophilia drug that was made from processed donated human blood. In the early days of the AIDS epidemic, it was discovered that the product was contaminated with HIV. They were forced to take it off the shelves in America and Europe. Bayer decided there had been too much financial investment in the product, and rather than destroy the inventory, they sold it in Latin American and Asian countries instead. They even continued to produce it for a few months until their supplies ran out. There's no way to know how many people were infected with HIV as a result, but at a bare minimum, it had to have been in the thousands. Plus, however many of those people may have unknowingly infected in turn, and so on. In the 1980s, when AIDS was pretty much a guaranteed death sentence, Bayer knowingly killed probably tens of thousands of people, and no one went to jail. $600 million settlement. Story 2. Fungi are much closer related to animals than either one are to plants, and specifically to protostomies, bugs and worms of all sorts. Fungus cell walls are made of the same polymer that arthropods' exoskeletons are made of, and are coded for by the same gene. There have been proposals to reclassify fungi in the animal kingdom. It's already starting to happen. People are getting sick with fungal infections in places that would be unusual to find them before, and treatments are very limited because of our similarities. It's easy to think about climate change in terms of weather events and floods and droughts. People tend to overlook the effect it will have on diseases and infections. Basically, more and worse. Story 3. Hart's flea medication kills your pets and everybody knows about it. But because of a loophole, Hart's can still sell their flea medication and just prey on the people who don't know. They also actively try to cover it up. The most messed up part? They're still selling it today. Right now, you could go to Walmart and buy a euthanasia kit for your pet thinking it's flea medication. My cat of 6 years died because of Hart's. Never use Hart's flea medication. It is a death sentence for your pet. Story 4. The Vatican archives are something like 50 miles of information that almost nobody can see unless they know it's there and put in a formal request to see a specific thing. My understanding is that nobody can enter just to browse. You don't necessarily have to know it's there. The way it works functionally is you give them a list of works you'd like to see. They will see if they have them, and if they do, decide whether or not they want to let you see them. If they consent, you are permitted to view the text in a locked room with a pencil and paper for note taking. It sounds draconian, but most museums operate very similarly. Understand that the Catholic Church fully intends to exist forever. Therefore, they need to protect these works forever. Protecting something forever is very difficult. Story 5. In the beginning, DuPont messed up their non-stick Teflon pans. They knew high exposure to the stuff was bad, but they never did anything about it. As a result, traces of forever chemicals can be found in 98% of the American population, and probably beyond. There's currently a large PFOS scandal breaking out against 3 million S and other companies in Belgium. They knew for a very long time that these chemicals didn't break down and end up in people's bodies. These might be linked to an increase in cancers. It's not even a night at this point, it's literally everywhere, even bags of microwave popcorn. The state of Maine has issued guidance for hunters in 4 counties to discard deer meat due to high levels showing up in tested deer harvests. PFAS chemicals were used in the local paper mills, and in turn, the leftover pulp slurry was given to local farmers who spread it on their fields as fertilizer. Deer are contaminated from eating in the fields, and runoff has put it into the local rivers and fisheries. It's been documented in leachate from a large number of landfills and risks contaminating groundwater. Military bases? Used in fire suppression systems. It's been the better part of a century of them being used everywhere, and we're only just beginning to realize the potential harm. Story 6. The CIA faked a vampire attack. I mean, they really murdered a guy to achieve it. But something about the whole blood draining thing really takes it to the next level. From Killing Hope, U.S. military and CIA interventions, since World War II Part 1, which can be found on the CIA website. Another Lansdale-initiated Saiwar operation, played on the superstitious dread in the Philippine countryside of the Aswang, a mythical vampire. A Saiwar squad entered a town and planted rumors that an Aswang lived in the neighboring hill where the Huks were based, a location from which government forces were anxious to have them out. 2 nights later, after giving the rumors time to circulate among Huck sympathizers in the town and make their way up the hill, the Psywar squad laid an ambush for the rebels along a trail used by them. When a Huck patrol passed, the ambushers silently snatched the last man, punctured his neck vampire fashion with 2 holes, held his body by the heels until the blood drained out, and put the corpse back on the trail. When the Hucks, as superstitious as any other Filipinos, discovered the bloodless comrade, they fled from the region. Story 7. That a company can sell animals that have zero chance of ever being healthy. Marshall Farms is the largest company in the US that makes a lot of ferret supplies and is the largest ferret breeder in the country. You cannot buy a healthy animal from them. They have inbred their ferrets so bad that if you do buy one, you are looking at 3 expensive lifelong medical problems that are going to happen. Not might are. You actually might get lucky in that your ferret dies before that happens. A good chance of that happening as well. A ferret from a healthy breeding stock can easily live to be 12 or 15 years old. A Marshall ferret? You will be lucky to see 7. Wondering if your ferret is a Marshall ferret? Check behind their ears for 3 small dots. Those are put there to show they have had proper procedures done. If you see them, then you should have a few grand set aside right now for medical bills because you are going to need it. Story 8. That we kill 100 million sharks a year. I once wrote something on this as there was a stat that said 11,416 sharks are being killed every hour. Unsurprisingly, those rates of killing far exceed the rate at which the sharks can repopulate, and many are being killed before they reach adulthood. Some species of shark live an average lifespan of 15 years, while others can live for up to 100 years. But at the current levels of fishing, they're becoming hugely threatened. At present rates, between 6.4 and 7.9% of all existing sharks are being killed each year. English shark protection organization Shark Trust believes around 73 million sharks are killed for finning alone, targeted hunt for fins, and this is the major issue that needs to be addressed. China consumes 95% of the world's shark fin production, and Hong Kong is the main destination for shark fins harvested from elsewhere, satiating the Chinese demand. There are only 10 or 15 people worldwide killed by sharks each year, and it is believed that, in most cases, shark attacks are a case of mistaken identity, with the sharks, who usually attack from below, mistaking humans, often on surfboards, for seals. Story 9. I worked as a vet tech when I was 17. Had a parvo case come in and die in one of the kennels. Parvo is very contagious and bad. You have to use bleach to clean it every day for a full 2 weeks. On day 14, the last cleaning, a Sunday, I sprayed most of the cage and ran out. I didn't want to have to mix the bleach mixture that was only used for the one cage for the last cleaning, especially as it was mostly covered. I only needed a few sprays to finish. I too did not know not to mix cleaners. So I finished spraying with the normal cleaner and stuck my head in to clean the back wall. Burning eyes, coughing, almost passed out. Fortunately, the kennel was on the top row, so when I slouched, my head came out and I was in clean air again. The regular cleaner was ammonia-based, and I learned not to mix chemicals. It was awful. My mom told me exactly what I had done when I got home. I did manage to clean the rest of the kennel by waiting a bit, then holding my breath. The entire bank of kennels was empty too due to the parvo puppy having been housed there. Story 10. When we were 5, we were told not to swim in dirty water because of bilharzia, schistosomiasis. Microscopic worms that burrow into your skin or enter up your urinary tract and then lay eggs inside your body. When I learned about bilharzia at university, there was a case study about a remote village in Africa who had requested help figuring out this common health problem. So a group of doctors and scientists actually traveled there and stayed with them for a week or two. They're determined, A, that it was in fact bilharzia B, that they got it from swimming in a local lake. So they treated basically the whole village and explained that it came from the water in the lake because it's contaminated with human waste. They advised them not to swim in the water and to boil it prior to use. Okay, thank you for reading till now. And here's the kicker. A year later, some of the team returned to the village to conduct a case study. There were again lots of sick people. Upon visiting the lake, they found kids swimming and people washing clothes. And they saw a sign hammered into the ground that read, "Do not piss in the water." Story 11. Old fact, But everything we smell is just particles of whatever that smell is entering our nose. Smell poop? You have some poop particles in your respiratory system. While they technically are the particles of whatever you're smelling, it's good to make the distinction that it's not literally the same ones you see as solids. It is only certain types of compounds that are easily able to become airborne. Fortunately, most of these are harmless, even the very foul ones. In the case of poop, it's mostly caused by a compound called scatolate. No, I'm not kidding. Whereas in rotten meat, it's mostly putrescine and cadaverine. Story 12. That the same side of the moon always faces the Earth. It just doesn't seem feasible to me. There is an experiment you can do that helps it make sense. Tell someone to turn around 360 degrees slowly. Face them and circle around them while keeping your eyes on them. When you've done a full circle around them, you'll notice you have turned 360 degrees yourself. And when they, Earth, see you, Moon, again, they still see the same sight, your face, because you kept facing them all this time, seeing the same image of the moon, making it appear as if it doesn't turn. And that's called being tidally locked in Earth-Moon terms. Story 13. Doctors actually used to do autopsies and get into a surgery or aid with childbirth without washing their hands. This, of course, resulted in a lot of deaths. And I read somewhere that the first doctor to suggest washing hands was ridiculed, put in an asylum by his colleagues, and there he was beaten by the guards and later died, probably because of the wounds he suffered from the beatings. Oh, and there's a surgery with a 300% mortality rate. The 300% mortality story is about Dr. Robert Liston. To elaborate, Robert was famous for his speed and skill in amputations in a time before anesthetics. The case? Amputated the leg in under 2.5 minutes. The patient died afterwards in the ward from hospital gangrene. They usually did in those pre-Listerine days. He amputated in addition the fingers of his young assistant, who died afterwards in the ward from hospital gangrene. He also slashed through the coattails of a distinguished surgical spectator, who was so terrified that the knife had pierced his vitals, he fainted from fright and was later discovered to have died from shock. Story 14. The Ford Pinto was a flaming death trap that Ford knew how to fix and decided not to. The gas tank was fixed right behind an idiotically thin bumper, making puncturing the tank almost absolute in the case of a rear-end collision. If such a collision were to occur, the light frame would also most likely bend around the doors, trapping the driver inside. Ford knew of these defects, but instead of recalling the cars, they decided that, on average, they would most likely only have to pay out around $230,000 per death, which was much cheaper than the recall, which would have cost millions. Story 15. That you are literally just data being interpreted by your brain. And we know for a fact your brain is not perfect and might not be good at doing that. A cool fact that illustrates it is that your nose is obstructing your face 100% of the time. Your brain just removes it and fills in the blanks. You can see your nose sometimes when you think about it. Close one eye, or put the tip of your finger right on the tip of your nose. If your brain is removing that kind of data as just a default setting, what other default settings do we have that are literally making so we can't see, feel, smell, or hear the things around us? It's just wild to think that everything I see, hear, feel, smell, and taste might just be my brain messing up interpreting the data. And the scariest part is it could be consistent across the entire species. What we perceive as real might not be real at all, just an incorrect interpretation. Story 16. One of the largest scientific projects in history, ITER, which can lead to unlimited clean energy, clearly for the benefit of everyone, took many decades to conceptualize and start building in 2009, and it is still not built. Why? As usual, lack of funding, bureaucracy, politics. Now, the fun part is that a single championship of the world in soccer costs more than this whole multi-decade scientific project that can literally save humankind. Just imagine not having the championship of the world in soccer one year, and that'd cover one of the most important steps of humanity. There isn't a lack of resources. Basically, every major problem can be solved relatively quickly. World hunger, clean energy, climate change. It's all about priorities. The choice is to watch soccer on telly this year or have clean energy forever. It's just that most people will choose soccer. Story 17. They knew Challenger could explode if they started in such cold temperatures. The O-rings that seal the solid fuel booster rocket components get brittle at colder temps. On the morning of the start date, they had minus 10 degrees Celsius. They had data from previous launches at slightly warmer temperatures, where the first O-ring failed and the second got badly singed, but it still managed to seal. Basically, they had data of a near catastrophe, which they avoided by sheer luck. Morton Thiokol, the supplier of the solid fuel booster rockets, knew this, and when NASA asked if they could start at such cold temperatures, Thiokol Management said, "No, we recommend to wait at least till 12 degrees Celsius." NASA was outraged, since the start date was in January. This would delay it much further. The start already got delayed 2 times due to bad weather and a broken handle on the capsule door. So NASA said to think about it again. And Thiokol Management did that and came to the conclusion that their data didn't support the concerns of their engineers, and it only showed that even if the first O-ring failed, the second would still seal. They never had data of a catastrophe, only successful launches. After a long internal debate, they told NASA to go ahead with the launch at such temperatures. NASA even wanted the recommendation in writing signed by the CEO of Thiokol to cover their butts. They all knew it had a high chance of exploding on launch, but risked it anyway in hopes of getting lucky again. And for what? Money? Pushing more launches because they promised Congress that? Reputation? Whatever the reason was, it wasn't worth it. Story 18. If you had told Kid Me in the 80s that the information age, wherein a massive number of people have access to vast amounts of data from nearly anywhere on the planet and a couple places planet adjacent, in the age of alternative facts, wherein massive numbers of idiots dislike reality so much, they make up random crap and devote everything to make that crap the cornerstone of their personal identity, would not just overlap on a Venn, but be nearly indistinguishable, I would have called you a pessimist. Now here we are in the dumbest timeline. Story 19. A lot of the battered fish that you buy frozen in stores isn't actually fish. It's shark and stingray meat. Companies don't like using real fish because they have bones. Stingrays and sharks don't, so it's much easier to process and turn into nice battered meals. Don't support the overfishing of our precious shark life, please. They're having a tough time as it is. And seriously, stingrays are adorable. Don't hurt them either. And before you bring up Steve Irwin, as an Australian, I can tell you that he'd want you to forgive them. They aren't bad. Story 20. Slavery is still legal in many countries. While a lot of countries abolished slavery, that usually refers to the slave trade, not ownership. And many of those countries, even if they abolished the ownership of slaves, didn't create any legal provisions to prevent slavery or human ownership. For instance, while it's been illegal to buy or sell a slave in the UK, it only became illegal to own a human in the UK in 2010. Story 21. Your DOT-approved motorcycle helmet is not safe at all. First, the standard is based on car crashes, not motorcycle crashes. Second, the rest allows for 400 kilonewton of force in their tests to be transferred to your head. Your skull cracks at 290 kilonewton, meaning a helmet can allow skull-crushing force to your head under lab conditions and still pass. Third, only one area of the helmet is tested. Although multiple areas could be tested, they only do it once. Manufacturers can and do choose specific areas of the helmet to reinforce, making the rest of the helmet weaker. Fourth, only the helmet's crash protection is tested. Roll-off is not examined. Nobody checks the face shield or DD rings. Lastly, 20% of randomly tested DOT helmets don't even pass this standard. In a meta-analysis of other studies, some research nerds indicated that 20% of DOT-approved helmets don't even meet DOT standards when retested. If your helmet only says DOT, throw it away and get one with either a Snell, ECE, or Kim Fim sticker. Story 22. I heard that someone conducted a study where he and she dropped cats off multiple stories of buildings and noted the damage to the cats. What he found was that up until the 9th story, the cat's initial reaction when dropped was to try to put their legs out to absorb some of the landing. And the cat's damage graph was going up fairly linearly until the 9th story. When dropped from the 9th story, the cats made a parachute by spreading their legs apart and going up from the 9th story all the way up to the either 15th or 20th story. The cat's reactions were to do the same parachute tactic, and the damage to the cats from the 9th story up was about the same: a few broken ribs and a punctured lung. I think some of the cats might have died, but the ones who survived have one hell of a tale to tell to their cat friends. Story 23. Cops kill twice as many white people each year compared to black people, while there are more whites than blacks. When you take into account the number of police interactions, there's no statistical difference. On the most extreme use of force, officer-involved shootings, we find no racial differences in either the raw data or when contextual factors are taken into account, said Harvard economics professor Roland G. Fryer Jr. in the abstract of his July 2016 paper. Mr. Fryer, who is black, told the New York Times that the finding of no racial discrimination in police shootings was the most surprising result of my career. Story 24. The USS Indianapolis was a naval ship during World War II. It was on a secret mission delivering parts of the atomic bomb. After it dropped off the parts, it was sunk by a Japanese submarine. The men on the ship were stuck in the water for 4 days. The messed up parts are, a lot of the men were eaten by sharks, like hundreds of them. One man cut a fellow sailor's neck and drank his blood. Other men were holding down men in life rafts and raping them. Basically, all the men just went crazy in the water real quick, because they knew no one was coming to save them. But they got really lucky and ended up being found. There were originally like 1,000 men in the boat, and only 387 survived. Story 25. On April 24, 1967, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov burned as his descent module hurled towards Earth after multiple malfunctions on the craft, being the first person to die during spaceflight. The vehicle was known to be faulty. Some report as much as 203 faults on the craft. And Komarov knew he was going to die, but still decided to go to spare his friend, Yuri Gagarin, of the same fate, him being Komarov's replacement. The reason the Soviets sent a faulty spacecraft into space was the harsh political climate, punishing anyone daring to point to defects of Soviet technology. Gagarin himself sent a memo pointing out the faults of the craft, but nobody dared to send it up the chain of command. Everyone that saw the memo was demoted or punished in some other way. Story 26. A lot of astronomy stuff blows my mind and always will. The fact that just wrecks my brain is that looking into space is literally looking back in time. When the James Webb Telescope becomes operational, we'll be able to see further back than ever before, to our primordial universe, when the first galaxies and stars were forming after the Big Bang. It also blows my mind to think that if another advanced civilization lived about 50 million light years from Earth and had amazing optical technology, if they pointed their telescopes here, they would see the dinosaurs instead of us. That is mind-blowing. All of it, really. Anything quantum, like quantum entanglement. It's all nuts. I could never study that stuff, even if I had the brain for it. I think I'd go insane. Story 27, that the military just got a $768 billion budget approved. That doesn't even cover the separate blank check. No auditing, no accountability black ops budget. A budget senators aren't even allowed to look at. In a pandemic with record inflation and 800,000 Americans dead from an unfettered public health crisis that left hospitals and doctors physically fighting for scraps of PPE, and social welfare programs are left for everyone to duke out amongst themselves for scraps and be vilified by so-called conservatives, who are in absolute, unquestioned support of the bloated, obscene, immoral military budget. By the way, the military budget for the United States, and again, this doesn't even include the Black Ops budget, eclipses any country on Earth by something like 19 times.